So I wanted to do just a quick overview on some of the exam tips, and there are some good ones out on the College Board website, particularly about FRQs. There used to be a list on the College Board site where they gave you some pointers on FRQs, things they don't really take points off for, like if you confuse length and size on array and array list, I don't think they take off for that, or missing a semicolon, and I'll try to find that list. But there's also a good one here that has some really good ideas, and hopefully with the screen share you can see this. And so of course they're giving you some general tips, and then they have some FRQ specific tips. There are many references out on the College Board website, and I will try to post links to these for you, but there is the AP subset list of methods that are in the AP subset, so you can know what methods they expect you to be familiar with. For example, some of the string methods like substring. They also provide that to you on the exam day. They give you, I believe, the list of the AP subset methods, so you can refer to them during the exam. And let's look at, and of course good night's sleep is critical. The problem with that gets to be that some students are taking 4 or 5 AP exams and they seem to get stacked up in a few days, and so you may have 2 exams or 3 before, and it gets really hard because you're prepping for those and you're staying up late. So wherever possible, it's a good idea to get a good night's sleep if you possibly can. Make sure you bring a watch with you to the exam so you can track your time. That's really important. You might be in a room with a clock, you might not, and sometimes the proctors will put like every half an hour or something how much time is left, but it's a really good idea if you have your own watch with you, I find. All right, so here are some general tips. Problems are generally placed on the exam in order of perceived difficulty. Now, that being said, if you are great with array lists but terrible with sorts, you know, that's not going to be much help to you. But you should try to give yourself time to look at every problem and see if you can either answer it right away or narrow down to a couple of choices and then make a decision. If you get stuck on it, don't spend 15 minutes on one problem. Circle the number, flag it, star it some way, move on to things that you do know so that you can come back to it later. And again, they will give you the quick reference along with the test booklet, so you don't have to memorize necessarily everything. The quick reference booklet is going to remind you, like, this method takes a string and it returns an int or something like that. So make sure that if you can't remember a method exactly, you go and look at that quick reference card so that you can just keep on going. There is no case study anymore. There are some optional labs that I'm going to try to get to, but again, they are optional, and I think we've covered pretty much the same material with the exercises we've done. So you don't have to worry about a case study anymore, and that's really a good thing. On the multiple choice, if you can eliminate 1 or 2 choices of those listed, you can kind of narrow it down and take a guess. And you really should read all of the answers before making your final decision. Now on the FRQs, these are some important points here. Make sure that you've read the problem and you've paid attention to things like the hidden word and the guess will always be in capital letters. So on the hidden word FRQ, lots of folks spent time worrying about 2 uppercase, 2 lowercase. When it's said in the FRQ, you don't have to worry about that. Assume everything's in uppercase. Some folks wrote a lot of code to account for a guess that was shorter or longer than the secret word. Well, in the FRQ it said assume that the guess and the secret word are the same length, so you didn't have to worry about that. So make sure that you underline, circle whatever you need to do things that you find important as you're reading the problem. Pay attention if they have, you will receive no credit. You will not receive full credit unless you do X, Y, Z. Pay attention to those kinds of things. I know it's hard because you're under so much pressure and you're trying to read so quickly. Another option is after you write the code to go back and double check what did they ask for, did I put everything in there, to reread or skim the problem again to make sure that you have gotten everything done. Pay attention to preconditions and postconditions. We're going to start talking about preconditions and postconditions down the road. But if you've noticed on the FRQ in the comments, maybe above some of the code that they give you or above the area where they want you to write a method, in the comments they'll have preconditions or postconditions. The precondition meaning something you can assume to be true. So for hidden word, a precondition would be like maybe the guess and the secret word are the same length. Or you can assume that you're not going to get a non-zero input to the method. So pay attention to those, because if they're telling you that you don't have to worry about something, you don't need to code for it. So the preconditions will help you with that. Postconditions are what should happen at the end of, say, a method. And so it will tell you, this method should, at the end you should have something or other happening. So when you write your code, you want to make sure that it satisfies the post condition. But we'll talk about that going forward in a chapter or two. So another good example, never let the beginning of a problem prevent you from getting points at the end. So a lot of the problems have multiple sections. Some of the later sections might in fact be easier than the earlier ones. If you can't do part A of a problem, don't assume that you can't do B and C and skip it. Go ahead and look at B and C. You might be able to do them. The other thing that's nice is that, as we saw in one of the array FRQs that we did, you might be asked to write one method in part A, and then you're going to call that same one in part B, and then maybe in part C you're going to call the method from part B, and so on. So assume that method A works as specified regardless of what you wrote, and now use it in part B, okay? And solutions that implement functionality provided by this method rather than invoking it will not receive full credit. So what they're telling you is, even if you didn't get part A, but you know how to invoke or call the method that you would have written in part A, go ahead and call it in part B and assume it works, and you might get full credit for part B even though you don't get credit for part A. And don't reinvent the wheel. So if they have you write a method in part A, and they want you to call it in part B, don't rewrite the code from part A, just call the method from part A, or they won't give you credit. And then they point out here the best solution would probably include a call to the method written in part A. You can earn credit for calling the method correctly even if part A didn't work, and so on. Another thing that's kind of important is make sure what you write by hand is legible. So if that means to leave some spacing, to indent a little bit, to write neatly, if they can't read it, they can't necessarily score it for you correctly, okay? And it says here, if you accidentally omit a curly brace but you've indented clearly, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt, say on an if statement, for example. Commenting doesn't necessarily help your score, so don't necessarily waste time on comments. If you don't have a lot of time, if you need to go back and feel the need to clarify with a comment, you can, but I wouldn't waste a lot of time on that. Try to use meaningful variable names. So, if you're dealing with square roots or something, you might want to use, root or s-root or something like that instead of using x or some big long name. And I would advise you to keep variable names short because you're not going to want to write long variable names when you are pressed for time. All right. If you know only how to do part of a problem, go ahead and write the code for the part that you know how to do, because they do give partial credit for some things. Don't just write, well, I don't know how to do it, but in theory I understand that I would write a loop and blah, blah, blah. If you know how to write the loop part, but you don't know the rest of it, go ahead and do what you can. And sometimes they will ask you for a justification, a sentence or two for your answer, so don't skip that if they do. Here's another thing. If you write a solution and you realize, oh, this is not correct, I'm going to start over, and so you start over, don't waste time erasing. Just make a big X through the first part of the code that you don't want them to read, and save yourself some time. If you have two solutions and you forget to cross one out, they will only grade the first one. Don't waste time copying the method header over. They generally give you that, as you saw in the FRQs that we had. They'll put in the public int, method name, parameter. Don't rewrite that. Just keep on, right under it and start from that. If you run out of room, find a blank page to continue your code, and make sure you indicate to them continued on, next page, and then on the next page, make sure you put this as, my continuation of question 3 or whatever. Now they do tell you if a class is not specifically part of the AP subset, you may not want to use it. So if char at is not a part of the AP subset, but substring is, you're better off to use substring. However, I do believe if you use char at and you use it correctly and you get the answer correct, I do believe they will give you credit. But you're better off, and I'll find the sheet with the AP subset on it for you and try to get that posted, but you're better off to only use the methods that are part of the AP subset. Even if you know methods that are not part of the subset that would work, they want to see the methods that are part of the subset for the exam. All right, so I'm going to kind of let that be the lecture for tonight, that you understand that